The night of the Belmont Charity Gala shattered in an instant when a ragged street kid pushed past security and screamed, "Your mother is alive, I saw her in the landfill." Philip Belmont froze, the world tilting beneath him as the boy held up a battered rosary his mother once cherished. In that moment, the billionaire realized everything he believed about her death might have been a lie. The night of the Belmont Charity Gala shattered in an instant when a ragged street kid pushed past security and screamed, "Your mother is alive, I saw her in the landfill." The words hit the room like a shockwave, freezing hundreds of polished faces mid-applause. Philip Belmont stood center stage, still gripping the podium, his practiced speech slipping away as if someone had pulled the floor from under him. For a man used to controlling boardrooms, markets, and the narrative around his life, nothing prepared him for a stranger tearing open a truth he thought was sealed months ago. The boy, no older than 10 or 11, looked wildly out of place amid chandeliers and couture gowns. His clothes were torn and dusted with grit, his hair wind-matted, his cheeks streaked with the kind of grime that stays even after rain. Security swarmed him instantly, but he twisted out of their grasp long enough to lift his hand high. Dangling from his fingers was a worn rosary, the gold plating faded and the beads chipped, yet unmistakably familiar to Philip. It hung in the air like an accusation, like proof. Philip's chest tightened. That rosary, he had seen it every day of his childhood. It had belonged to his mother, Caroline Belmont, pianist, philanthropist, and the gentlest soul he had ever known. She had clutched it through storms, illness, and every sleepless night she spent worrying about him. And on the night she supposedly passed away, it had been described as lost, a trivial detail at the time, a lie with devastating implications now. The crowd murmured, drawing back as if the boy carried a contagion rather than a message. Cameras pivoted, phones lifted. People whispered behind manicured hands, debating whether the child was mentally unstable or part of some elaborate blackmail scheme. But Philip barely heard them. His eyes stayed locked on the rosary, glowing faintly under the banquet lights. He stepped toward the edge of the stage, ignoring Ariana Matthews's Frank E. who tugged anxiously at his arm. "Philip, don't," she hissed. "He's just trying to cause trouble. He wants attention." Her voice wobbled, desperate and urgent, as though she needed him to turn away more than the boy needed to be heard. Philip brushed her off gently, not out of rudeness, but because something deep inside him had snapped awake. Something that told him this boy was not lying. The guards finally restrained the kid, pulling him back by the shoulders. But he planted his heels on the marble floor and shouted again with every ounce of strength he had left. "She told me to find you. She said you'd know this was hers." His voice cracked from exhaustion and fear, but Philip could hear the earnest insistence beneath it. This wasn't a performance. This was survival. The rosary slipped from the boy's grasp when a guard jerked him too hard, skittering across the polished floor until it stopped at Philip's feet. He knelt, ignoring the gasps from the audience who weren't used to seeing him kneel for anything. When his fingers closed around the metal cross, a flood of memories surged forward: his mother's laughter in the old Boston house, her hands guiding his across piano keys, the soft clink of beads between her fingers as she prayed quietly during storms. He rose slowly, the rosary enclosed in his fist, the edges biting into his palm, a sharp pain, grounding and real. He looked at the boy, really looked, and saw no deception there, only urgency and a strange flicker of hope. "What's your name?" Philip asked, his voice low but steady. "Mason," the boy answered, finally still now that he had Philip's attention. "She told me you'd come if you knew she was alive." A wave of disbelief passed through the audience. People exchanged looks, waiting for Philip to laugh it off, to dismiss the entire ordeal as absurd. But he didn't. He stepped off the stage, took another few strides toward Mason, and gave a single command: "Let him go." The guards hesitated. Ariana stepped in sharply. "Philip, stop this. You're remaking a scene. Think about your reputation, the company, the press." "My mother," Philip cut her off, "comes before all of that." Ariana froze at the tone in his voice. She wasn't used to being sidelined. Not here, not ever. Mason adjusted his oversized hoodie, lifting his chin despite the trimmer in his hands. "She told me you'd recognize the mark on the cross. She said it happened when you knocked it off the piano when you were little." Philip turned the rosary in his hand. There it was, a faint dent on the bottom of the cross, a blemish the family jeweler could never fully repair. The room felt tilted, unstable, filled with an electricity that made every breath heavy. "I want to know everything," Philip said to Mason. "Start with how you found her." Mason swallowed, glancing nervously at the wealthy crowd glaring down at him like he didn't belong in the same universe. "I live near Harborview landfill," he said. "Sometimes I go there to find stuff to sell. She was there in this little shack made of wood and plastic. She was sick, but she talked about you all the time. She said you loved music. She said you'd find her." His voice wavered, but he forced it steady. "She asked me to bring you the rosary. She said it was the only way you'd believe she wasn't dead. The words twisted Philip's insides. How long had she been suffering? Who abandoned her there? Why? Questions piled on questions, each darker than the last. Ariana stepped between them suddenly, her face tight with an expression she tried to mask as concern. Philip, this is insane. Your mother's cremation was verified. We had documentation. You saw the signed reports. This child is manipulating you. Philip stared at her. For the first time, he noticed something in her eyes, fear, sharp and defensive. Not fear for him. Fear of him learning the truth. Did I ever see her body? He asked quietly. Ariana flinched just barely, but enough. That's not fair, she whispered. You were grieving. You. Mason, Philip said, cutting her off again. Tell me where she is now. The boy hesitated. I can show you. But you gotta hurry, there were men watching her. They said she shouldn't be talking to anyone. Those words set off alarms in Philip's mind, men watching her, a secretive transport, a death with no body. Suddenly, every detail surrounding Caroline Belmont's passing looked less like tragedy and more like orchestration. The gala no longer mattered, the donors no longer mattered. Even the empire he spent years holding together seemed trivial compared to the possibility that his mother had been discarded like an inconvenience. Philip straightened, the rosary still clutched hard enough to leave marks on his skin. We were leaving, he told Mason. Then he turned to the guards. Anyone tries to stop him again will deal with me. He didn't raise his voice, but his authority was absolute. Ariana reached for his arm once more, desperation creeping in her tone. Philip, think. You're being reckless. Don't throw your life away for my mother, he snapped. There is nothing more important. He ushered Mason toward the exit, ignoring the stairs, the cameras, the chaos erupting behind them. The moment the ballroom doors swung open and the cool night air hit his face, he felt a shift inside, something heavy breaking loose. Something long numb finally waking up. If his mother was alive, he would find her. If she had been wronged, he would uncover every name responsible. And if someone tried to bury the truth, he would tear their world apart to dig it out. Tonight, the Belmont Empire no longer defined him. Tonight, his mission did. The gasps had barely faded when the ballroom transformed into a storm of confusion, judgment, and fascination all at once. No one in that room had ever seen the pristine world of Manhattan high society disrupted by a child who looked like he'd crawled out of a place they pretended didn't exist. Women in sparkling gowns stepped back as if Mason carried disease. Men tightened their jaws, annoyed that their perfect evening was suddenly less about charity and more about scandal. Every camera in the room pointed directly at the boy now, catching the dirt under his nails, the exhaustion buried under his defiant expression, and the raw fear that came from standing in a world that would never welcome someone like him. Yet he didn't run, he didn't back down. He kept his gaze fixed on Philip Belmont, the billionaire whose life he had just sliced open in front of hundreds of people. Philip's heartbeat pounded against his ribs as he stared at the boy. The weight of the rosary in his hand felt heavy, almost scorching, as if it carried every memory of his mother pressed into the metal. The cross was dented in the exact place he remembered. That detail alone unraveled something inside him, something he had buried under grief, routine, and the expectations of a world that applauded him for never showing weakness. Mason's chest rose and fell rapidly, adrenaline clearly keeping him upright. She's alive, he repeated, but softer this time, as if speaking directly to Philip instead of the crowd. Security guards tightened their grip on his shoulders, ready to drag him out as soon as Philip gave the signal. But Philip didn't give it. Each second he spent looking at the boy dredged up questions he should have asked months ago. Why was the cask closed? Why did Ariana insist on handling the documents? Why did the hospital block his access to certain records? At the time, he had chalked it up to grief and procedures. Now those same details stacked into something far more sinister. The murmurs in the room sharpened, turning into judgmental whispers from wealthy guests who were more offended by the disruption than by the possibility that a woman might have been discarded like trash. Someone muttered, "Where are his parents?" Another said, "This is exactly why security needs to be tighter." A third scoffed, "What a ridiculous stunt." But none of them mattered. Philip kept his eyes on the boy who had risked everything, maybe even his life, to get into that ballroom. The kid's determination in the middle of so much hostility struck him harder than the accusation itself. Ariana moved quickly to reclaim control of the situation. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she stepped between Philip and Mason, her designer gown shimmering with each breath she took. She flashed him a reassuring smile, the one she used whenever she wanted to manipulate a room in her favor. "Philip, darling, let security escort him out. He probably stole that rosary from someone at the shelter. These kids trade in sob stories. It's how they get money out of generous people like you." She spoke loudly enough for others to hear, planting seeds of doubt with the ease of someone who had mastered social warfare. Mason's eyes widened, his jaw clenching. I didn't steal anything.
He shouted, "Even to me!"
She made me promise to bring it to you. His voice cracked from strain, but he held firm. He looked terrified but determined. Philip noticed something else as Mason kept shifting his weight to one foot. The other had no shoe. The sock was torn, exposing skin scraped and bleeding. This kid had fought to get here. He didn't wander into this ballroom by accident. He earned his way into it through sheer desperation and courage. Ariana tried again, softer this time. Philip, sweetheart, think carefully. He's from the streets. He probably heard about your mother from some news clip and decided to make money off your grief. Please don't entertain this. People are watching. Investors are watching. That last line was the wrong choice. Philip finally turned his gaze to her. For months he had tried to convince himself that her concern came from love, not control. But standing there now, rosary in hand, boy trembling in front of him, he saw something he had missed. Ariana cared more about optics than truth, more about the empire than the mother who built it, and more about their reputation than his pain. He stepped past her. The decision came naturally. Without hesitation, the guards looked at him for instruction. Let him go, Philip ordered. No one disobeyed Philip Belmont. Mason sagged with relief when the guards released him. He rubbed his sore shoulders, still wary, still ready to bolt if things turned ugly, but he didn't run. Not from Philip. The kid lifted his chin. I know where she is, he said, voice trembling but steady around the edges. But she's real sick. And there were men who didn't want her talking to anyone. Philip's pulse spiked. Something electric shot through his nerves, a primal instinct sharpened by months of unanswered grief. Men watching her, moving her, preventing communication. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Ariana's mask cracked for a split second, just one, but the flash of worry wasn't about his mother. It was about him finding out. Philip looked back at the crowd. Every pair of eyes stared at him, curious, judgmental, hungry for scandal. Once he might have cared. Tonight the gala felt like a cage he had been tricked into decorating. Mason tugged lightly at his sleeve, almost apologetic despite everything. I didn't want to come in here, he said. But she said you'd listen if I showed you the rosary. His voice wavered with guilt, as if he believed he had ruined something rather than saved someone. Philip crouched so they were eye level. You did the right thing, he said, and he meant it, deeply. Mason swallowed hard. Will you come with me? I can take you to where she was? But we gotta hurry. Philip didn't look at Ariana again. Didn't look at the stunned crowd. Didn't look at the cameras capturing the biggest scandal of the year. He closed his hand around the rosary. The metal felt like a promise. Let's go, he told Mason. And with that single choice, Philip Belmont walked out of the world that had defined him and stepped into the one that would finally show him the truth. Philip stood just outside the ballroom doors, gripping the rosary as if it were the only thing tethering him to the earth. The hallway felt cooler, less suffocating than the chaos behind him, but his pulse still hammered with the force of a truth too big to fit inside one moment. The rosary sat in his palm, heavier than he remembered, as though months of grief had turned it into a relic of everything he'd lost. Mason watched him carefully, his posture tense yet steady, the posture of someone who had lived through too many days where the wrong reaction could mean danger. Philip turned the cross slowly between his fingers. There was the dent, tiny, crooked, unmistakable. He hadn't thought about it in years. Not since the day he'd knocked it off the piano during a teenage tantrum about practicing scales. His mother had laughed and told him mistakes were part of growth. The jeweler had tried to smooth out the flaw, but a faint ridge remained, impossible to erase fully. Now that ridge might as well have been a signature. Ariana had claimed the rosary was a coincidence, that many looked like it. But she didn't know this dent existed. Only two people knew, Philip and the woman who had kept that rosary beside her through every concert, every illness, every prayer. His vision blurred slightly, not from tears but from the shock of realizing something he should have questioned sooner. If the rosary was real, then what else was real? What else had been staged? He remembered the funeral, quick, closed casket. A cremation scheduled within 24 hours, the hospital insisting it was necessary due to health concerns. Ariana smoothing over every uncomfortable detail. Druter Bradford explaining that viewing the body would be traumatic, and him like a fool accepting it all because pain had made him malleable. Mason shifted his weight, drawing Philip's attention. She said you'd recognize it, the boy murmured. She said that if anyone tried to tell you she was gone, the rosary would tell you the truth. The boy's sincerity cut deeper than any accusation. Philip felt anger flicker inside him, not at Mason, but at himself for letting others dictate what he believed about his own mother. He studied Mason more closely, noticing the dirt under his nails, the bruises on his shins, the way exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. This child had not come here for money. He had come because someone asked him to deliver a message, and he had risked everything to do it. How did you get this? Philip asked, voice low but controlled. Mason swallowed hard. She put it in my hand. She said it was the only way to make you believe. His eyes darkened with a memory that clearly weighed on him. She was real weak, some days she couldn't stand, but she said your name a lot. Said she kept hearing music in her head so she wouldn't forget things. Philip's chest tightened at that. Music had been Caroline Belmont's lifeline. She used to say that melodies kept her spirit anchored. If she was still hearing them, she was still fighting to stay herself. Where exactly did you see her? Philip pressed. At Harborview landfill, Mason replied. She had this little shelter made of plastic and wood, but she didn't want to stay there. She said she'd been taken there. She didn't choose it. Philip felt cold spread through him. His mother, educated, graceful, beloved by half the city, reduced to living among trash heaps. The thought was grotesque, unreal, and yet the evidence was in his hand. He turned the rosary again, watching the beads catch the dim hallway light. Each bead held the wear of her fingers, worn down from years of devotion. This wasn't just jewelry, it was a breadcrumb left behind. A message, a plea. He had spent months grieving while she had spent months surviving. Mason continued, voice cracking slightly. She called you every night before she went to sleep. Not with a phone. Just with her heart, I guess. She thought maybe you'd feel it. Something inside Philip broke. Not violently, but quietly and irrevocably, like a lock finally giving way. He closed his hand around the rosary until his knuckles whitened. This small object had outlived lies, outlived the people who tried to erase Caroline Belmont, and now it was leading him back to her. This is hers, he whispered, not a guess, not a hope, a truth. Mason nodded. I know. In the distance, he could hear the muffled noise of the gala recovering behind the ballroom doors, voices rising, rumors forming. Ariana likely spinning some narrative to salvage her image. But none of that mattered anymore. His entire world had pivoted. Everything before this moment was irrelevant. Everything after it depended on what he did next. Philip exhaled slowly, lifting his gaze. Tell me exactly what she said when she gave you this. Mason drew in a breath, steadying himself. She said, give this to my son. He'll know I'm still here. He'll feel me in the weight of it. The phrasing struck Philip like a physical impact. It sounded exactly like her, poetic, thoughtful, stubbornly hopeful, even in despair. Memories of her playing the piano at dawn, humming through hardships, comforting him through heartbreaks, filled his mind. She had always believed love left echoes strong enough to reach across any distance, and now her echo was in his hand. Philip finally straightened, resolve settling into his bones. The rosary was more than proof, more than a clue. It was a promise. One he intended to keep. We're gonna find her, he told Mason, whatever it takes. Mason's shoulders loosened, relief softening his expression. I knew you would. Philip slipped the rosary into the inner pocket of his suit, close to his chest, exactly where his mother used to keep it when she traveled. He felt its weight through the fabric, grounding him, guiding him. That small pressure became a vow. He would follow every lead, overturn every lie, tear down every barrier that stood between him and the truth. If someone had hidden his mother, they would regret underestimating him. If someone had hurt her, they would face consequences no boardroom or courtroom could shield them from. And if she was still alive, really alive, he would bring her home. He turned to Mason. Let's start now. The boy nodded and fell into step beside him. Together they headed for the elevator, leaving behind the glittering world that had never meant less to Philip Belmont than it did at that moment. The rosary pressed against his heart with every step, reminding him that somewhere out there, his mother was waiting and that she had never stopped believing he would come. Ariana Matthews had always been a master of controlling a room, but tonight the room was slipping through her fingers. The elegant facade she'd perfected, soft smile, measured tone, flawless posture had begun to crack the second Mason shouted that Caroline Belmont was alive. Now, standing in the hallway with the ballroom doors still trembling behind her, she could feel the narrative shifting away from her grip, and she was desperate to pull it back. Philip, she began, forcing a soothing lilt into her voice, you re-overwhelm, that boy is confused. You know how these kids are, they hear stories, they get ideas, and they say whatever they need to get attention. You cannot take this seriously. Her hands reached out for his arm again, delicate fingers adorned with diamonds that sparkled beneath the hotel lights. But Philip stepped out of her reach without even looking at her. The dismissal hit her harder than a slap. Ariana was not accustomed to being ignored, especially not by the man whose last name she planned to share and whose fortune she expected to inherit one day. She regrouped quickly, repositioning herself just enough to block Mason from Philip's immediate view, framing her body as a shield, both protective and manipulative. Sweetheart, think about everything going on tonight, she continued. The press is everywhere, investors are watching. You don't want anyone to think you were being taken advantage of. Mason stiffened at her words, resentment flickering in his eyes. "I'm not lying," he said, voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "I saw her. She talked to me, she gave me the rosary." Ariana turned head toward him slowly, the way someone might look at a stray animal they wished would disappear. "You were very young," she said, every syllable coded in condescension. "Sometimes you misinterpret things. Maybe the woman you met just looked like his mother." "I know what I saw," Mason snapped, "and she knew his name. She knew everything about him." Ariana's jaw tightened. That detail didn't work in her favor. She needed Philip to doubt the boy, not consider him credible. "Philip, please," she said, her voice softening again, trying a different tactic. "You were grieving. People in grief want to believe anything that gives them hope. This boy is exploiting that." Philip slowly raised his head, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "He brought me something no one else could have," he said. "Something my mother kept with her every day of her life." Ariana faltered. She had expected him to argue, to deny, to defend her. Instead, he simply stated a fact, one that pulled the rug out from beneath her efforts. She tried again. "Jewelry is replicated all the time. Anyone could find something similar. The kid probably dug around in junk piles and got lucky." Mason bristled. "She said you'd recognize the dent," he shot back. "She remembered it from when you were little." Ariana's eyes widened a fraction, just a fraction, but it was enough for Philip to notice. She recovered quickly, masking the reaction with a practiced scoff. "Please, that's just guessing. Children pick up on clues. They learn things from adults around them. This whole thing could be a setup." Philip had heard enough. A setup. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a warning. Who would go to these lengths? Why? What would they gain? These questions landed with precision, directed at Ariana without naming her. Her pulse quickened. She could feel her composure slipping like sand through her hands. "The world is full of opportunists," she insisted. "Look at him, dirty clothes, no shoes. You think someone like that wandered into a gala for anything other than money?" Mason stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers with a courage he barely felt. "She told me you wouldn't want him to find her," he said. "She said you tried to make him stop." Ariana froze. The air thickened. Philip's gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. "Why?" he asked slowly. "Would my mother say something like that?" Ariana scrambled mentally, searching for an explanation that wouldn't sound incriminating. "Philip, grieving people say strange things. They imagine enemies where there are none." She must have been confused. She wasn't well. Mason shook his head. She wasn't confused. She was scared. That word landed harder than anything said so far. Scared. It painted a picture Ariana didn't want in Philip's mind, a picture of Caroline alive, vulnerable, abandoned, and possibly targeted. Ariana's voice rose slightly, losing its polished edge. "Philip, please listen to reason. This boy is manipulating you. You're under a lot of stress, and this is not real. Your mother is gone. You saw the documents. You saw her death certificate." Philip took a step toward her. "Did I see her?" he asked. "Did I ever see her body?" Ariana faltered again. Her gaze flickered. That one moment of hesitation was a confession she never intended to give. "No one saw her," Mason said. "They took her out through the back of some building in a truck. She told me they didn't want anyone to know." Ariana's breath hitched. She realized the boy knew more than she expected. Too much. Enough to unravel everything. Still, she tried to maintain control. "Philip, I know you're emotional, but please don't humiliate yourself by believing a fantasy." "The only humiliation," Philip replied, "would be ignoring a chance to bring my mother home." Ariana felt the ground shifting beneath her. The power she relied on, the influence, the narrative, the image was dissolving. Desperation clawed at her chest. "Philip, if you walk out with him right now, you'll destroy your reputation. You'll let a child dictate your life. Think about what people will say." "Let them talk," Philip said. "My mother comes first." The words were final, not angry, just final. Ariana opened her mouth again, but nothing came out that wouldn't expose her further. Her polished composure had cracks now, cracks that revealed fear, not concern. "Philip," she tried once more, softer than before, "I just want what's best for you." "Then don't stand in my way," he answered. Mason tugged lightly at Philip's sleeve. "We should go," he said. "If the men watching her come back, we might not find her again." Ariana's face drained of color. She couldn't hide her reaction this time. Philip saw it. And that was the moment he knew without doubt that Mason was telling the truth. He turned fully away from her. "Stay here, Ariana, enjoy the gala." She reached out instinctively, but he was already walking, already choosing a path that didn't include her. Guests watched in shock as Philip Belmont left the gala beside a dirt-covered boy had just detonated the biggest scandal Manhattan had seen in years. And Ariana stood frozen, the mask she'd worn for so long slipping at last, not cracked but shattered. The moment Philip stepped out of the hotel lobby with Mason at his side, something inside him shifted. He no longer felt like the polished billionaire who had walked into the Belmont Gala hours earlier, rehearsed and controlled. Now every step carried urgency, purpose, and a rising fury he fought to keep contained. The night air hit him like a wake-up call, sharp, cold, and honest. He inhaled deeply, letting the city's pulse fill his lungs. There was no turning back. He led Mason toward the sleek black SUV waiting near the curb. The driver, who had been hired for the event, straightened when he saw Philip approaching with a barefoot child trailing behind him. "Mither, Belmont, sir, is everything all right?" the man asked, scanning Mason with concern. "No questions," Philip said, opening the back door. "Just drive." His tone left no room for argument. Mason climbed in carefully, as though afraid he might dirty the immaculate leather seats. Philip noticed and shook his head. "Don't worry about the car," he said, "just sit." The boy nodded and slid into the corner, pulling his knees to his chest. Once Philip joined him inside, the SUV pulled away from the curb, returning them to the blur of Manhattan streets. Neon signs streaked across the windows, horns blared distantly, but none of it mattered to Philip. Not tonight, not anymore. His thoughts raced back to the rosary in his pocket, its weight pressing into his chest like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Ariana's voice still echoed in his head, not because he believed anything she'd said, but because the desperation in her tone had revealed more than her words. She was afraid, not of the scandal, not of the boy, but of him discovering the truth. And that meant something far more disturbing was happening beneath the surface. He turned his attention to Mason, who stared out the window with a mixture of awe and unease. "Start from the beginning," Philip said. "Tell me everything, every detail." Mason hesitated. He wasn't used to adults actually listening. He wasn't used to mattering. "I first saw her 2 months ago," he began. "I go to Harborview landfill to look for stuff people throw away. Sometimes you get lucky, old phones, copper wire, bottles you can trade." He paused to pick at the frayed knee of his jeans. "One day I heard someone coughing inside this little shack made of crates and tarp. When I looked inside, she was sitting there." Philip imagined his mother, gentle, refined Caroline Belmont, inside a shack made from garbage. The image made his stomach twist. "At first I thought she was just another person who lived there," Mason continued. "But she talked different. She used big words. And she told stories about music, about traveling, about a son she missed." Mason glanced at Philip. "She said you played piano when you were little. She said you were stubborn about practicing." Philip exhaled sharply. That wasn't something a stranger could guess. His mother would tease him for skipping piano lessons to sneak outside and play basketball with neighborhood kids. She would bribe him with hot chocolate just to get him to finish a sonata. "What else did she say?" Philip asked. "That she didn't know where she was at first," Mason explained. "She remembered being in a hospital, but said people she trusted were making decisions for her. She remembered being tired all the time, like someone was keeping her that way. Then she woke up in the landfill with no idea how she got there." Philip gripped the armrest. Something cold settled in his spine. "Did she mention names?" "Only one," Mason said. "She said someone named Bradford kept telling people she wasn't getting better." Druter Jenna Bradford, the hospital's lead physician. The same one who had assured Philip his mother's condition was irreversible. The one who had insisted on accelerated processes, expedited paperwork, restricted access. The one Rihanna claimed was the best in the city. It was too much to be coincidence. Philip tilted his head back against the seat, jaw clenched hard enough. "Mason," he said, "did you ever see anyone near her? Watching her?" The boy nodded a few times. "Men in a gray truck, big guys. They didn't look like social workers. They wore gloves and had these boxes with weird labels on them." His brow furrowed. "Your mom would hide when she heard the truck. She said they weren't supposed to know she was awake. A gray truck, hazard labels, men who didn't belong anywhere near a recovering patient." Philip's heart slammed. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate. He pulled out his phone instinctively, then froze. If Ariana was involved, if Bradford was involved, if anyone else had been monitoring him, he couldn't risk making calls that could be tracked. His smartphone suddenly felt like a liability. He turned it off. "Driver," he said, leaning forward, "take us to the nearest electronics store." The driver blinked in the rearview mirror but obeyed. Once inside the small 24-hour shop, Philip purchased a prepaid burner phone, paid in cash, and handed it to Mason. "For emergencies," he said. "If anything happens or you see anything unusual, call me from this, not my regular number." Mason accepted it with wide eyes, cradling it like a treasure. Back in the car, Philip finally allowed himself to connect the dots he had avoided for months. His mother's sudden downturn, the closed casket, the hospital's restrictions, Ariana's insistence on handling the funeral details, the speed of the cremation, the forged signature he never questioned. He had been grieving, yes, but he had also been manipulated. And the manipulation had started long before his mother disappeared. The car rolled to a stop at a red light. Outside, a massive billboard flashed with Philip's own face from a past corporate campaign. smiling confidently beneath the words Belmont Enterprises leading the future. The irony stung. He looked nothing like that anymore. That man had been blind. Where is the landfill? Philip asked. In New Jersey, Mason said. Near the river. I can take you there. We were going, Philip decided, tonight. The driver looked nervous but nodded. Philip rested his hand on the rosary in his pocket. For the first time since his mother's so-called death, he felt her presence not as a memory, but as someone out there waiting for him. He would find her. He would uncover what really happened. And whoever orchestrated this would face consequences beyond anything they were prepared for. He glanced at Mason, seeing not a ragged street kid but the brave messenger his mother had chosen. Thank you, he said quietly. Mason shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. She helped me, he replied. I owed her. Philip nodded once. Then he turned his gaze forward, eyes sharp with determination, every trace of hesitation burned away. Tonight marked the beginning. He was done believing lies. It was time to hunt for the truth. Back at his penthouse, once a symbol of power and composure, Philip no longer saw polished marble or designer furniture. Everything felt foreign, staged, like a showroom meant to distract him from the truth he had ignored. Mason lingered near the entrance, clearly overwhelmed by the towering ceilings and glass walls overlooking Manhattan. But Philip pushed forward, his mind fixed on one goal: uncover everything hidden from him. Come with me, he said, leading Mason to his private study. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, the study felt grounded, dark wood paneling, shelves lined with old sheet music and business documents. The faint scent of his mother's perfume that still clung to some of her books he had stored there. It had always been his retreat, but tonight it became something sharper: an interrogation room, a battlefield, a vault of truth waiting to be cracked open. Philip approached the large mahogany desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat a folder he had not touched since the funeral: Caroline Belmont medical reports. His heart tightened as he pulled it out. He remembered signing papers while barely coherent, Ariana insisting on handling the details, Drea Bradford offering condolences with rehearsed sorrow. At the time he couldn't stomach reading any of it. Now he forced himself to. He flipped the folder open. The first page was his mother's death certificate. He had seen it only once, long enough to sign where they told him to. Now, reading it, he noticed things he should have caught months ago. Dates that didn't match the timeline he remembered. A doctor's signature that didn't resemble the handwriting on earlier reports. And a cause of death listed as cardiac failure due to complications from sedation, a phrase that struck him as intentionally vague. He turned to the next document, a transfer authorization supposedly signed by him 2 days before Caroline's passing. He froze. The signature on the page mimicked his, but the angle was off, the slant slightly different, the loops tighter than his usual handwriting. He studied it closely, rolling his jaw with growing anger. I didn't sign this, he muttered. Mason came closer. What does it say? That I approved moving my mother to a restricted wing for intensive care. He tapped the page. I wasn't even in the country that day. Mason frowned. So someone faked it. Philip nodded slowly. Someone wanted her moved somewhere I couldn't reach her. He continued digging. Each paper added another layer of deception: medication logs filled with sedatives she'd never needed, notes recommending isolation for patient stability, progress reports listing her as unresponsive when she had clearly still been conscious, even a form authorizing immediate cremation signed by Ariana. His breath caught. Why had he not questioned any of this? He knew why. Because grief had made him pliable. Because he had trusted the wrong person. Because he had been more concerned with keeping public order than asking hard questions. He flipped to the toxicology summary. His eyes scanned the numbers, the dosages. They were higher than anything recommended for her condition. They were drugging her, he said under his breath, on purpose. Mason shifted uncomfortably. She did say she felt tired all the time, like someone kept her that way. The boy's words hit him harder now, supported by cold, clinical evidence. He turned to the final section, billing statements. They were bloated with charges that made no sense: special transport services, private security, restricted facility fees. And then he saw it: Almeda Frieden Biotransport, the same name Mason had mentioned, the same logo on the truck from the video. His stomach twisted. They didn't just hide her, he whispered. They moved her like cargo. Anger simmered beneath his ribs. Not the volatile kind, but the focused, dangerous kind, the kind that made a man like Philip Belmont unstoppable. He gathered the documents and spread them across the desk for a better view, piecing together a timeline. She wasn't dying, he said. They made her appear dying. They cut off her visitors. They controlled her medication, and when she didn't actually die, they dumped her. Mason finished quietly. Philip swallowed hard. The thought of his mother, gentle, cultured, graceful, waking up disoriented and alone in a landfill made his throat tighten. He couldn't imagine the fear she must have felt, the desperation, but she survived. She stayed alive long enough to tell Mason the truth, and that meant she was fighting for him. We were not done, he said, pulling his laptop closer. If they forge documents once, they'll have left other trails. He accessed the hospital's online portal using credentials he still retained as Caroline's legal representative. For months he hadn't bothered logging in, it hurt too much. Now he felt no hesitation. The portal loaded, revealing an archived file marked restricted, authorized practitioners only. But someone had forgotten to revoke his access. He opened it. Inside were internal notes from Dr. Bradford, security logs, and surveillance entries. One entry stood out: patient transferred to sublevel C for monitoring, no family access permitted. Another note contradicted the public report: patient shows intermittent responsiveness despite sedation. And then hours before a supposed death, proceed with final phase, arrange transport. Philip rubbed his temples. Final phase was not medical terminology, it was operational. He scrolled further, reaching a flagged folder requiring an admin password. He tried guessing. First attempt denied, second denied. On the third, he used an old detail Ariana often relied on for passwords: her sister's birthday. It worked. Inside was a single video file. He clicked play. A grainy recording appeared, time-stamped the night Caroline died. Two men rolled a covered gurney down a service corridor. Caroline's hand, frail but moving, slipped from beneath the sheet. She was alive, barely conscious, but alive. Watching that moment stole the breath from Philip's lungs. A familiar figure stood at the far end of the hall, Ariana. She handed an envelope to one of the men, speaking with them briefly before they wheeled the gurney out a back door toward a truck marked Almeda Freight. The screen blurred as rage clouded Philip's vision. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment Ariana played the grieving fiancé came crashing back with a new, monstrous truth. His mother had been taken, by people Ariana paid, and the hospital helped. Philip closed the laptop slowly, controlled, precise, because losing control now would accomplish nothing. He looked at Mason. The boy watched him with a mix of fear and trust, waiting to see what he would become now that the truth was undeniable. Philip stood, his voice steady. Tomorrow we going to Helena Medical Center. We going to get answers from Dr. Bradford. And she's going to tell me exactly where they sent my mother. Mason nodded, clutching the burner phone. Philip placed a hand on his shoulder. You helped her, me. I won't let anything happen to you. The determination in his voice was unshakable. Tonight he uncovered the truth. Tomorrow, he would confront the people who buried it. Helena Medical Center looked very different to Philip in the morning light. What once felt like a pristine sanctuary, white marble floors, chrome railings, calm blue walls, now resembled a fortress built to hide the truth. As he approached the entrance with Mason walking quietly beside him, the glass doors slid open automatically, greeting him with sterile air and the faint scent of disinfectant. He used to associate this smell with care. Now it carried the sting of betrayal. Nurses and staff greeted him with polite nods, surprised to see him return after so many months. His mother had been one of the hospital's most respected patients, and he had been one of its most generous donors. Today, however, he didn't come as a benefactor, he came as a man seeking justice. He headed straight for the administrative wing without checking in. People stepped aside instinctively, his expression alone told them not to interfere. Mason kept close, his small frame dwarfed by the endless hallway, but the determination in his eyes mirrored Philip's. They reached Jenna Bradford's office, a frosted glass door with her name etched elegantly across it. Philip didn't bother knocking. He pushed the door open and walked in. Dr. Bradford looked up from her desk, startled. She wore her usual white coat, her hair neatly pulled back, her posture composed. But when she saw Philip's face and noticed Mason entering behind him, her composure cracked with a flicker of unease. "Philip," she said, attempting a warm tone, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "No," Philip answered. He closed the door behind him. "I know what you did to my mother." Her smile faltered, but she forced professionalism back into her expression. "I'm not sure I understand. Why don't we sit and discuss whatever concerns you have?" "I don't need a discussion," he said. "I need the truth." He placed a stack of medical documents on her desk, copies he had made from his review the night before. Bradford's eyes darted to them, recognition flashing across her face before she caught herself. Philip continued, "You lied about her condition. You restricted her access to me. You sedated her far beyond medical necessity. And then you authorized a transfer that should never have happened." Bradford cleared her throat. "You were misinterpreting the reports. Your mother's decline was rapid. Any actions taken were in her best interest." "Best interest?" Philip leaned forward. "I saw the toxicology logs. I saw the sedative doses you recorded. I saw the forged signature you used to move her to a restricted wing." Her face paled. And then, like a snake shedding skin, she switched tactics: calm, controlled, defensive. "Philip, grief can distort memories. You were under immense emotional strain at the time. It's understandable to look for someone to blame. Mason stepped forward. He's not wrong, the boy said, voice firm. She wasn't dying. She was awake. She was talking. Dr. Bradford's eyes snapped to him. Who is this child? Why is he here? He's the person who found my mother, Philip said. The one she trusted to bring me the rosary you wanted to disappear. A muscle twitched in Bradford's jaw. Philip continued, his voice turning colder, sharper. I also found the surveillance video. The one showing men wheeling her out while she was still conscious. The one where you hand an envelope to the transport team. Bradford stiffened for the first time. She looked afraid. That video is restricted, she said quietly. You mean it was supposed to be restricted? Philip replied. But your security protocols were sloppy. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them on her desk. Philip, you don't understand the full picture. Then explain it, he snapped. Because from where I stand, you kidnapped my mother. No, Bradford said quickly, shaking her head. Not kidnapped, relocated. Relocated, he repeated, incredulous, to a landfill. Bradford flinched at the accusation. That was not part of the plan. Philip's breath caught. She had just admitted there was a plan. What plan, he demanded. Bradford hesitated, then exhaled shakily. Your mother became complicated. She began asking too many questions. She refused certain medications. She attempted to contact outside parties even when she was supposed to be under supervised care. She was imprisoned, Philip corrected. We were instructed, Bradford said, her voice dropping lower, to manage the situation in a way that reduced risk. Philip's hands curled into fists. Risk to who, to what? Her eyes flicked momentarily toward the door, as if expecting someone to appear. Philip, powerful people were involved. People with authority. People with influence over this hospital. I followed orders. His voice hardened. Who gave those orders? Bradford swallowed. I can't say. You can, he replied, and you will. When she didn't answer, he stepped around the desk and leaned over her chair. She recoiled, not from fear of violence, but from the force of the truth pressing in around her. Tell me, he demanded, where is she now? Bradford hesitated again. The hesitation stretched until finally something inside her broke. Exhaustion, guilt, fear, or perhaps the realization that Philip would not walk away without answers. She was supposed to be transferred to a long-term care facility, Bradford murmured. A secure one. But the team, they diverted her. Someone intercepted the transport. Mason's eyes widened. So those men weren't yours? Bradford shook her head. No, they were contractors hired through Almeda Freight for medical transport only. Someone paid them extra to take her somewhere else. Philip's heartbeat thundered. Who? Her lips tightened. I don't know, but I can show you the rotting logs from that night. The transport vehicle veered off its assigned path before the GPS system was disabled. Finally, something useful. Pull up the logs, Philip ordered. Bradford hesitated. If I do this, I'm implicating myself. You already did, Philip said. Now choose whether you help me fix it. Her hands shook as she turned to her computer and logged into the restricted system. After several layers of verification, she pulled up the route history. A map appeared, showing a highlighted path through Manhattan, across the bridge toward New Jersey. Then the road abruptly deviated, turning down an industrial road before the signal cut out. That's where the trail ends, Bradford said. Whatever happened after this wasn't part of hospital protocol. Philip stared at the screen, fury and determination intertwining. Do you have the contact records for the transport driver? Yes, she whispered. Print them. As she complied, Mason tugged lightly on Philip's sleeve. That road, he said, pointing at the screen, is near Harborview. Of course it was. Every thread led back to the same place. Philip looked at Bradford one last time. If anything happens to Mason because of what he knows, or to my mother because of what you did, I will make sure your career, your license and your freedom disappear. Dr. Bradford closed her eyes. I understand. Philip took the printed documents and turned toward the door. This isn't over, he said. Not even close. He and Mason stepped into the hallway, leaving Jenna Bradford behind in the ruins of the lies she'd helped build. Now they had a direction. Now they had evidence. And now finally they had momentum. The industrial sector of New Jersey always felt forgotten. Long stretches of cracked asphalt, rusting warehouses, and chain-link fences rattling in the wind. As Philip drove following the printed peace logs, the skyscrapers of Manhattan shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced by the bleak underbelly of a city that rarely appeared on tourist maps. The road ahead matched the route from the transport logs almost perfectly, and each mile deepened the pit in his stomach. Mason sat beside him in the passenger seat, hugging his worn hoodie tighter as the air grew colder. He knew this area far better than Philip ever would, but even he looked uneasy. This is where the truck came, Mason said, pointing out the window. Have you seen that road before? We were close. Philip slowed the SUV as the road shifted from worn asphalt to patched concrete. Ahead stood a cluster of warehouses, old brick structures with broken windows and fading paint that once told the names of companies long bankrupt. The place felt abandoned yet not entirely empty. This was the deviation point, Philip murmured, tapping the map. The truck turned off the main road right here before the signal dropped. He parked near an old warehouse with a sagging roof and extinguished fluorescent lights flickering weakly inside. Mason leaned forward, peering through the windshield. I know this place, he said. People come here to scrap metal. And there's a guy, someone who works nights. He might be seen something. Philip nodded. Then we talked to him. They stepped out of the SUV. The air smelled of rust, oil, and damp concrete. Far in the distance, machinery clanged, maybe from an operating site, maybe just the wind playing tricks. Mason guided Philip along the side of the warehouse until they reached a small makeshift workshop built from scavenged metal sheets. Sparks burst from inside as someone cut through pipe tubing. Mason waved, "Hey,
Mr. Donnelly."
The sparks died. A burly man in his late 50s stepped out, wiping sweat and metal dust from his face with a rag that didn't look clean enough to change the result. His beard was patchy, his jeans torn, and his boots coated in grime. Despite his rugged appearance, his eyes held sharp intelligence. Mason Donnelly grunted. "What were you doing here, and who's the fancy guy?" Philip stepped forward. "My name is Philip Belmont. I'm looking for information about a transport truck that passed through this area a few months ago." Donnelly raised an eyebrow. "Trucks come through here all the time. What makes this one special?" Philip pulled out the printed log. "This truck, Omada Freight, it turned down this road the night my mother was taken." Donnelly's face changed, a subtle shift, but noticeable. Recognition sparked in his eyes. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "I remember that night," he muttered. "Not because of the truck those guys show up now and then, but because they were in a hurry. And because they weren't supposed to be here." Philip's pulse quickened. "They weren't supposed to be here according to who?" "The city," Donnelly replied. "This road got restricted after some chemical spill a few years back. Only authorized vehicles can use it. So anytime trucks sneak through it stands out." "What did you see exactly?" Philip asked. Donnelly took a long breath and gestured for them to follow him into the workshop. Inside, tools hung from rusted nails, a workbench held piles of gears and bolts, and an old space heater hummed weakly. He waved them to sit on overturned crates. "The truck came through around 11 at night," Donnelly began. "Big gray one with hazard labels. 2 guys in the cab, 1 more in the back. They slowed near my shop. Thought they were lost, maybe checking directions." "What happened then?" Philip pressed. "They got into it with someone," Donnelly said. "A man in another vehicle. Dark SUV, looked expensive, out of place here." He flagged them down. They talked outside for a bit. Couldn't hear much, but it didn't look friendly. Philip exchanged a tense glance with Mason. "Do you remember what the SUV looked like?" Donnelly nodded. "Black tinted windows, but the plates," he hesitated. "I recognized them." Philip stepped closer. "How?" "Because I've seen them around this area before," Donnelly answered. "Dropping off things that shouldn't be dropped off. Picking up things that shouldn't be picked up. Usually connected to private clients who want something done quietly." Philip's stomach tightened. "Did you see anyone in the back of the truck?" "Yes," Donnelly said grimly. "When the big guy opened the rear door to talk to the SUV driver, I saw someone lying on a gurney, covered partially but not completely." Philip held his breath. "Was she alive?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Donnelly rubbed his beard. "Couldn't tell, but her hand twitched. I remember thinking it was weird, someone strapped down, being moved in an unmarked truck on a road that's restricted at night." He shrugged. "Didn't seem right." Philip steadied himself against the workbench. Hearing it confirmed by a witness, someone with no reason to lie hit him harder than the video. "Where did they go next?" he asked. "They turned past the cement yard," Donnelly replied. "There's an old service ramp that leads to a private dock by the river. It used to be for shipping containers, but now it's mostly abandoned. A few shady operations use it. They went down there." "A dock," Philip repeated. "What would they want with a dock?" Donnelly exhaled. "Sometimes people use it to transfer cargo onto smaller vehicles. You know, things they don't want tracked." Mason tugged Philip's sleeve. "That's near the landfill," he said. "It's all connected." Philip nodded slowly. Donnelly continued. "After about 10 minutes, the SUV drove off first. The truck followed a little after. I didn't get a look at their direction once they left the dock." Philip studied him. "Can you show us exactly where this dock is?" Donnelly sighed. "You re-dealing with dangerous stuff, Belmont. Folks who move people like that, they don't play around." "They took my mother," Philip said sharply. "I'm not walking away." Donnelly stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, I'll show you." They stepped back outside into the cold air. Donnelly pointed toward an overgrown path that cut through the side of the warehouse row. "Down there? Followed about half a mile. You'll hit the old dock." Philip turned to Mason. "You ready?" Mason nodded, though fear flickered behind his determination. As they headed toward the path, Donnelly called out, "Belmont." Philip paused. When you find whoever did this, don't let them walk free. Philip's eyes hardened. I won't. He and Mason continued toward the abandoned dock, toward the place where Caroline Belmont had vanished from the city's grid, where the truck changed direction, and where the truth was waiting under layers of shadows and corruption. They were getting closer, and Philip could feel it. The path leading to the abandoned dock felt like a forgotten scar across the land, overgrown with weeds, littered with broken glass, and bordered by rusted fencing that sagged under years of neglect. As Philip and Mason walked, their footsteps crunched over gravel and debris. The air grew colder, carrying the metallic tang of the river mixed with the stench of industrial runoff. Even without seeing it yet, Philip could sense the river head dark, heavy, indifferent to whatever wrongdoing had happened on its banks. Mason pointed at the cracked asphalt under their feet. I've been here before, he said quietly. People come here to dump things no one's supposed to find. Philip didn't respond, but the tightness in his jaw said enough. If people use this place to hide crimes, then it made twisted sense that someone would use it to make a patient disappear. As they reached the final curve of the path, the landscape opened to reveal the dock. It sprawled out like a skeleton of its former self, wooden planks warped and broken, metal posts bent at unnatural angles, and the remnants of old shipping crates scattered like driftwood. Graffiti stained the concrete pillars. A faded caution sign hung crookedly, authorized personnel only. The river lapped against the structure with a steady rhythm, the water black under the weight of the sky. Philip scanned the area instantly, searching for anything that might tell him where the truck had stopped. The logs ended around here, he murmured, holding up the map. Look for tire tracks. Mason walked toward the edge of the dock, examining the ground with the precision of someone who had spent years reading the world through patterns left behind. Over here, he called out. Philip joined him and saw faint impressions in the dirt, wide tread marks from heavy tires. He knelt down, brushing away loose gravel. These are from a freight truck, he confirmed. Large wheels, dual rear tires. The same kind from the video, Mason added. The tracks followed a curved path, looping toward the edge of the dock and then back out again. Something had definitely stopped here. Philip walked the path slowly, imagining the scene of the truck pulling in, its rear doors opening, the gurney being moved, his mother still breathing. The thought made his chest constrict. Near the far corner of the dock, something glinted. Mason spotted it first and ran toward it. Philip, look. He held up a small metal object, cylindrical, with faded red markings. Philip's eyes widened. That's a medical transport seal. He took it, turning it over. These are used to secure bio-transport containers so no one tampers with them. But why would they need one here, Mason asked. Because they were transferring something, Philip said, or someone. He scanned the water next. Something white bobbed near the dock's edge, caught between wooden posts. Mason crouched and fished it out with a rusty pipe. It was a torn piece of cloth, soft, pale, and familiar. Philip's breath caught. He recognized it. This was part of her hospital gown. Pieces were falling into place like a horrifying puzzle. Mason studied the cloth. It must be ripped when they carried her out. Philip pocketed it carefully, as if it were a fragile relic. They brought her here, that much is clear. He turned toward the rest of the dock, searching for more proof. Something near the loading ramp caught his attention, a metal cart overturned on its side. Dust coated most of it, except for one clear handprint smudged across the frame. A small handprint. Mason's eyes widened. Do you think she tried to hold on to it? Philip didn't answer. He didn't need to. He moved next to a set of abandoned crates and spotted something partially hidden beneath them, a clipboard. When he pulled it out, a burst of water droplets fell from the damp wood, but the paper inside the plastic sleeve was still intact enough to read. It wasn't a manifest. It was a routing sheet. Philip felt his pulse spike. The sheet listed scheduled cargo deliveries through the dock and unscheduled ones. One entry, hastily scribbled, stood out. Holding transfer unit destination, redacted, contact M. Selinger. M. Selinger, Philip repeated under his breath. Who the hell is that? He scanned the form further. Next to the contact line was a phone number, partially faded but legible, and under unit and abbreviations say. Philip, Mason asked, what does SC mean? Philip stared at the letters, mind racing through every medical abbreviation he knew. Then it hit him. Gabriel Hills. The private facility in the Colorado mountains, one notorious for treating high-profile clients, wealthy mental health cases, and someone might want to disappear legally. Gabriel Hills, Philip said. That's where they took her next. Mason blinked. They moved her across the whole country. Yes, Philip said, and someone signed off on it. He shook the clipboard again and a small card fluttered out, a visitor authorization badge, bent and mud-streaked. The name printed across it made Philip's vision tighten. Matthews authorized access. Ariana. She had been here. Physically here. at the dock where his mother was transferred. He felt fury ignite inside him, burning hotter than anything he'd felt before. Ariana hadn't just manipulated him into believing his mother was dead. She had overseen the next stage of the transport, approved it, ensured it. Everything pointed to one truth. Ariana hadn't been tangentially involved. She was orchestrating it. "We have to go," Fed voice low, steady, dangerous. Mason looked up at him. "To Colorado." "Yes, but first we talk to Salinger. Whoever he is, he knows everything." Philip pulled out the burner phone and dialed the number on the routing sheet. It rang once, twice. Then a click. Someone answered but said nothing. "This is Philip Belmont," he said. "I know who you are. I know what you did, and I know where you sent my mother." Still no verbal response, but the person on the line inhaled sharply. "I'm coming for her," Philip said. "If you want to protect yourself, you will talk to me now." Then the line disconnected. Mason looked uneasy. He hung up. "No," Philip murmured, staring at the dead phone. He panicked. He turned, taking one last look at the dock, the tracks, the cloth, the secure transport seal, the clipboard implicating Ariana. Everything here pointed to a meticulously planned operation. But mistakes had been made. Evidence had been left. Witnesses had seen. "You okay?" Mason asked softly. Philip placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're closer than ever, and I'm not stopping until she's back home." They walked back toward the SUV, two figures against the bleak industrial horizon, carrying a truth heavy enough to crush lesser men. But Philip wasn't a lesser man. He was a son hunting the people who stole his mother. And he would follow this trail wherever it led, even into the mountains, even into danger, even into hell if he had to. The flight to Colorado felt impossibly long despite lasting only a few hours. Philip spent most of it reviewing the documents from Ste. Helena Cross, referencing the routing sheet from the dock, and searching for any public record of an M. Salinger. There was nothing useful, no linked addresses, no employer information, no social media trail. Whoever Salinger was, they operated in the shadows, protected by people who knew how to keep things hidden. Mason sat beside him quietly, staring out the window as the cityscape faded into clouds. He looked small in the oversized leather seat, but his presence grounded Philip. Mason had become more than a messenger. He was a witness, a partner, and the key to understanding the days Caroline spent lost in a world that didn't care about her humanity. When the plane landed in Denver, they rented an SUV sturdy enough to handle the rough mountain roads. The farther they drove from the city, the more the landscape changed, skyscrapers replaced by rolling hills, then fir forests, then winding mountain passes. The air grew thinner, colder, sharper, the sky stretched broader than anything Mason had ever seen. "Is this where they took her?" Mason asked, hugging his hoodie. "Way out here." "Yes," Philip said. "Gabriel Hills isn't a normal medical facility. It's a place people send patients when they want them out of sight." Mason frowned. "Sounds like a prison." "In many ways," Philip said, "is." After 2 hours of climbing higher into the mountains, the trees parted, revealing a massive compound built against the slope. High stone walls, security towers, electronic gates, and a long driveway monitored by cameras. It looked nothing like a hospital. It looked like a fortress. The sign at the entrance read, "St. Gabriel Hills Private Recovery and Long-Term Care Center. Authorized access only." Philip parked the car just short of the gate. "We're not getting in through the front," he said. A speaker crackled from the guard booth. "State your name and purpose." Philip approached, showing no hesitation. "Philip Belmont. I'm here regarding my mother, Caroline Belmont. She was transferred here months ago." The guard checked a tablet. "We have no active record of a patient by that name." "How about inactive?" Philip asked. The guard paused. "Then no record exists." Philip's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. I have transit logs showing she arrived here." "Logs can be forged," the guard said flatly. "Facility policy prohibits releasing patient information without proper authorization." "I am her son," Philip said. "That's authorization enough." "Not for this facility," the guard replied. Philip leaned closer. "Where is Michael Salinger?" "Beat, then another." "I don't know who that is," the guard said. He was lying. Philip could tell by the subtle hitch in his breath and the way his eyes flicked away. But before Philip could push further, Mason tugged the sleeve of his jacket. "Look," the boy whispered. A camera mounted above the booth had tilted slightly, pointing directly at them, tracking them. Philip stepped back. The guard watched him through the glass, waiting. "We were leaving," Philip said finally. He returned to the SUV. Mason looked confused. "We were giving up." "No," Philip said, starting the engine. "We were not walking into a trap." He drove past the main road, circling the facility until they found a turnout overlooking St. Gabriel Hills from above. The compound spread beneath them, fenced courtyards, satellite dishes, multiple wings branching like spider legs. From this angle, it was clear the facility wasn't built to heal people, it was built to contain them. Philip grabbed binoculars from the glove compartment and scanned the perimeter. Guards patrolled in pairs, security cameras rotated on precise intervals. Doors required keycards, everything about the place radiated secrecy. Then he saw it, an older service access road winding behind the compound into a smaller building separated from the main wings. It looked less guarded. That might be where they took her, Philip murmured. How do we get? Mason asked. We walk, he said. They hiked through thick pines, careful to remain hidden. It took nearly an hour to navigate the uneven terrain, and by the time they reached the rear service area, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. The smaller building looked abandoned, windows dusty, lights dim, a metal door chained shut. But as Philip approached, he noticed fresh footprints in the dirt and a faint glow from inside the cracks of the boarded windows. Someone had been here recently. Philip pulled at the chain. It rattled but didn't budge. He stepped back, examining it, then used a nearby broken cinder block to smash the padlock. It snapped under the force. Inside, the building smelled of antiseptic and damp wood. The room was empty except for old bed frames, discarded wheelchairs, and a row of hooks on the wall where restraints once hung. Mason shivered. This place feels wrong, he whispered. Philip approached a dusty counter where a stack of boxes sat. He opened the top one. Hospital gowns. All marks Unit C. Unit C, the same abbreviation listed on the rutting sheet. He opened another box. Inside lay patient wristbands, most broken, all labeled with numbers but one, wedged at the bottom, still had a name. Belmont Caroline, status transferred. Mason's breath hitched. Philip's heart nearly stopped. She had been here. He held the wristband carefully, as if it were made of glass. Below transferred was a date 3 days after her disappearance and a destination code of the 17. Philip didn't recognize it, but someone inside the facility would. A noise sounded from deeper within the building, a soft thud, like something falling. Philip motioned for Mason to stay close and stepped toward a hallway lined with closed doors. The second door was ajar. He pushed it fully open. Inside sat a man on the floor, back against the wall, hands shaking. He wore a maintenance uniform with the C logo. His eyes widened when he saw them. You, the man stammered. You're not supposed to be here. Philip closed the distance between them in 2 steps. Good. Then you know something. I can't talk, the man said, trembling. They'll come after me. Who? Philip demanded. The man shook his head violently. Everyone. People in charge. People from outside. I shouldn't even still be here. They moved her. They moved all of them. Moved where? Philip pressed. What is a 17? The man's breath quickened. It's not here, it's off site. A remote holding facility up in the higher ridges, hard to access. Harder to leave. Mason's eyes widened. Is she still there? The man swallowed. If she's alive, that's where she'd be. What's your name? Philip asked. The man hesitated. Harris. Harris, listen to me, Philip said. If you help us, I swear I'll protect you. Harris shook his head. You don't understand the people running this. They don't care who they hurt. Neither do I, Philip replied, if they're standing between me and my mother. Harris flinched but finally nodded. I can draw you a map, but you need to leave now before they see you. Philip helped him to his feet. The man grabbed a clipboard, ripped off a blank sheet, and sketched quickly a series of sharp turns, hidden roads, and a Finelex labeled a 17 Ridge facility. Philip folded the page carefully. Mason looked at him with determination and fear intertwined. Are we going tonight? Yes, Philip said. The longer we wait, the more danger she's in. They stepped outside into the cold mountain air. Behind them, Harris whispered, be careful. You're heading toward a place no one comes back from. Philip turned. We will, he said, with my mother. The wind grew colder as Philip steered the SUV off the paved road and onto the rugged mountain trail Harris had marked on the map. The tires crunched over gravel and loose rock, the vehicle pitching slightly as the terrain became more uneven. Tall pines towered over them, blotting out much of the fading daylight. Mason clutched the handle above his seat, his wide eyes reflecting both fear and determination. How much farther is it? The boy asked. Philip glanced at the hand-drawn map. A few miles. The facility is hidden deep in the ridge. They built it where no one would wander by accident. Mason shivered. Makes sense. No one comes up here unless they were trying to hide something. Philip didn't reply. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. Every mile they drove felt like stepping deeper into a world designed to swallow secrets whole. The altitude increased, thinning the air, and clouds drifted low enough to brush the tops of trees. The deeper they went, the more the forest closed around them, its shadows creeping onto the road. Eventually the trail narrowed so much that branches scraped the sides of the SUV, screeching lightly along the metal. When the path finally became too narrow for the vehicle, Philip parked behind a cluster of boulders. We walk from here, he said. Mason nodded without complaint. The boy had grown tougher in the days since they met. Hardship had shaped him long before this journey, and now the mission stretched him further. They stepped into the forest, the ground soft beneath their boots. Philip led the way, scanning their surroundings with every step. He could feel they were being watched not by people, but by the mountain itself. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded amplified, like the terrain was testing them. The map led them up a steep incline, the air thinned further, burning their lungs. Mason stumbled once, catching himself on a fallen branch, but he pressed on without complaint. Philip offered a steadying hand. "Let me know if you need to rest." "I'm okay," Mason insisted. "We can't slow down, not if she's up there." His resilience struck Philip deeper than words. He nodded and kept moving. After another hour of climbing, the trees thinned just enough for them to catch their first glimpse of Facility A-17. It perched on a rocky plateau overlooking a sheer drop, a long, rectangular structure built of reinforced concrete, steel beams, and tinted windows that reflected the dying light. Floodlights lined the perimeter, though not all were turned on. A chain-link fence topped with coils of razor wire surrounded the compound, and motion detectors blinked faintly along the posts. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a containment center. Mason whispered, "They really put her in there." Philip's jaw tensed. They didn't expect anyone to come looking for her. The path ahead curved along a cliffside, but before they reached the final bend, Philip stopped abruptly and raised a hand for Mason to halt. Below, 2 armed guards patrolled near the entrance. "Armed," Philip murmured. "This is worse than I thought." "What do we do?" Mason asked. Philip scanned the area. A section of fencing behind the facility bordered a steep incline, dangerous, but less watched. "We go around," he said. "There's a weaker point on the backside." The detour took them along jagged rock formations and uneven terrain. Twice Philip had to steady Mason as loose stones slid beneath their feet. When they finally reached the backside of the facility, they crouched near a thicket of shrubs just feet from the fence. Philip pulled out a small multi-tool from his jacket. "Keep watch," he whispered. Mason nodded and peered through the leaves. Philip worked quickly, clipping the lower section of wiring. The fence gave slightly but didn't fall just enough for them to crawl underneath. He lifted the gap first for Mason, who hesitated only long enough to check for guards before sliding through. Philip followed. Inside the perimeter, the facility loomed larger. Up close, the concrete was weathered and stained with faint traces of where old signage had been removed. A narrow service door was tucked into the far corner, exactly where Philip expected staff to enter discreetly. Before approaching, he scanned the yard for sensors. The patrols on this side were minimal, only one guard walking the far end of the building, his flashlight beam drifting lazily across the ground. "Move fast," Philip whispered. They crossed the yard quickly, keeping low. When they reached the service door, Philip tried the handle. Locked? He inspected the electronic panel beside it. Simple keypad, old wiring. Whoever built this place hadn't updated their tech in years. "We need a code," Mason whispered. "Or we make one," Philip said. He studied the screws holding the panel in place, removed them quietly, and pulled the casing off. Inside, wires twisted together in predictable patterns. Philip carefully crossed 2 connection points. Triggering an override, the lock clicked. Mason stared at him. "How'd you learn that?" Philip gave a small, humorless breath. "Before I was a businessman, I was a kid with a curiosity problem." They slipped inside. The hallway beyond was narrow, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The air felt stale, as though it hadn't circulated in years. Old industrial paint peeled from the walls. Faint echoes of machinery vibrated through the floor. Mason whispered, "This doesn't feel like a place for sick people." "It's not," Philip said. "It's a holding site." They moved deeper into the corridor, passing door after door, some locked, some slightly ajar. One room contained old stretchers. Another held stacks of unused medical supplies covered in dust. They were closed now. Philip felt it in his bones. As they turned a corner, voices drifted from the far end of the hallway. Philip pulled Mason back behind a metal column. 2 staff members walked past, one wearing a white lab coat, the other in a security uniform. "Transporting the remaining patients tomorrow," the lab coat said. "We can't keep them here. Too risky." The guard grunted. "What about the Belmont woman?" Philip's heart stopped. "She's still stable," the lab coat replied. "But barely. They want her moved to Ridgepoint before the end of the week." Ridgepoint. Another facility. Mason looked up at Philip with fear. Philip held his breath, forcing himself to memorize every detail. The 2 staff continued walking, unaware of the pair listening in the shadows. Once they were gone, Mason whispered, "She's still alive." "She is," Philip said, voice tight. "And we're finding her tonight." They followed the hall deeper until they reached a reinforced door with the label Unit A-17 patient hold. The door had a biometric lock and a keypad. Before Philip could examine it further, a sudden clatter echoed from the hall behind them. The guard had dropped a clipboard. He turned quickly and spotted a shadow. "Hey!" "Who's there?" Philip grabbed Mason's hand. "Run." They sprinted down the hallway as shouts erupted behind them. Philip didn't look back. He didn't need to. They weren't just trespassing now. They were hunted. And the people who stole Caroline Belmont had no intention of letting either of them leave alive. The hallway exploded with movement the instant the guard shouted. Heavy boots slammed against concrete as several men converged toward the noise. Philip didn't waste a second. He gripped Mason's hand tighter and darted down the nearest corridor, pulling the boy behind him with determined urgency. The overhead lights flickered, throwing jittery shadows along the walls. Mason stumbled once, but Philip steadied him without slowing. Behind them, radios crackled, orders barked, and flashlights cut through the dim passageways like hunting beams.
This way!
Philip hissed, veering down a flight of metal stairs. Their footsteps rang sharply, echoing through the enclosed stairwell. The air grew colder as they descended to the lower level. Pipes lined the ceilings overhead, dripping condensation that speckled Philip's jacket. Mason's breathing grew faster, but he pushed himself to keep up. They reached the bottom floor, a maze of intersecting corridors with peeling paint and old emergency signs. Philip paused for only a second to orient himself, recalling the blueprint-like structure he'd glimpsed on the wall upstairs. A 17 wasn't designed like a normal medical wing, it was designed like containment. He led Mason down a narrow hallway illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. "We need to lose them," Philip whispered. "Find another stairwell or service tunnel." Mason nodded, glancing behind them. They were close. Philip could hear it too, the pounding footsteps drawing nearer, the clatter of weapons, the sharp commands, "Fan out." "Check every door." Philip swallowed hard. If they were caught, there would be no negotiation, no reasoning. These men weren't hospital security. They were operatives. They turned a corner just as flashlights hit the spot where they had been seconds earlier. "Go," Philip urged. They sprinted down the corridor, passing several locked doors until they reached one slightly ajar with a faint red glow spilling out. Philip pushed it open. Inside lay a storage room filled with old medical equipment, crates and boxes of abandoned supplies. The air was dusty and stale. Philip pulled Mason inside and eased the door shut, leaving only a sliver open to watch the hallway. Footsteps thundered past. 2 guards paused near the door. "You check that side," one said. "They couldn't have gone far." Philip's muscles tensed. He held Mason close, willing the boy to stay still. The guards stood only a few feet away, their flashlight beams slicing across the floor, stopping inches from the door. Mason trembled, but Philip's hand tightened around his shoulder, steadying him. After a long moment, the guards moved on, continuing down the corridor. Philip exhaled in a controlled breath. "We need to keep moving," he whispered. They slipped back into the hallway and continued deeper into the facility. The chaos above had forced the guards into a coordinated sweep, which meant the interior routes would soon be blocked. Philip scanned the signs on the wall. Medical wings, storage, utility access, patient observation, a wing. His heart jolted. A wing. "A 17 has to be connected to a wing," he murmured. "If we can get there, we might find whoever was caring for her." They followed the signs until they reached a heavy door requiring a keycard. Philip reached for the multi-tool again, but stopped. Footsteps approached from the opposite end. Too late to turn back. He grabbed Mason and pushed them both into an alcove just as 2 staff members exited the wing door. Philip seized the moment. As the door began to close, he caught it with his foot. The staff members froze. Before they could react, Philip yanked Mason inside and slammed the door shut behind them, locking the staff outside. Shouts erupted as fists pounded the metal door. "Run!" Philip ordered. They sprinted through a wing, a darker, colder section of the facility. The walls were bare except for faded patient numbers. The rooms they passed were empty, stripped of medical equipment, wheelchair tracks still etched into the floor. "This place was used long before they brought her," Philip muttered. "Why empty it now?" Mason pointed forward. "Look!" A soft glow spilled from a room near the end of the hallway. Unlike the others, this door was cracked open. Philip slowed, straining to listen. Then he heard it. A faint voice. Weak, raspy, but unmistakably hers. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The sound reached him like a forgotten melody, familiar, aching, powerful enough to buckle his knees. Philip. His name. Barely a whisper, but unmistakably his mother's voice. He stepped toward the door, trembling. "Mom," he breathed. Mason looked up at him, eyes wide. "Is that her?" Philip nodded once, overwhelmed. He pushed the door open. Inside was a small observation room, monitors unplugged, cables dangling, a single bed pushed against the far wall. But the bed was empty. Philip scanned the corners desperately until he saw it, a small speaker mounted near the ceiling, still glowing faintly. A playback device. They had recorded her voice, used to test cognitive responses, or worse, to mislead him if he ever got this far. His stomach twisted. Mason stepped closer, but that sounded real. It was real, Philip said through clenched teeth, but not live. He slammed a fist against the wall. They're removing her. They knew I'd come. Before he could gather his thoughts, a deafening alarm exploded through the wing. Red emergency lights flashed wildly. Facility breach confirmed.
Lock down all exits.
Philip grabbed Mason's hand. They found the door we forced. Footsteps thundered from every direction. Philip looked up at the ceiling. Ventilation ducts ran across the room, large enough for a child and maybe for him. He dragged a rolling chair beneath one vent and kicked off the cover. In there, Mason asked. It's the only way, Philip said. He lifted Mason into the duct. Crawl forward until you reach a junction. Wait for me there. Mason nodded and disappeared into the metal tunnel. Philip climbed up next, pulling himself inside. The metal was freezing, scraping his elbows as he crawled. Below them, guards flooded the observation wing, shouts echoing off the walls.
Find them! Now!
Philip's heart hammered as he climbed through twisting vents, following the faint echo of Mason's movements. After several turns, he saw the boy waiting at a junction, illuminated by a sliver of light from another grate. I hear people, Mason whispered. A lot of them. Philip listened. Multiple voices, footsteps, but also something else, a low mechanical hum, the sound of transport engines. They're preparing to move her, he said. We were running out of time. He pushed ahead, leading them toward the deeper sections of the facility. Then through another grate he heard it again. Not a recording. Not a playback. A cough. Weak. Human. Real. Philip froze, gripping the vent. That's her, he whispered, voice breaking. She's here. And nothing in the world could stop him now. The sound of that weak cough echoed through the metal duct like a lifeline. Philip froze, his breath catching as if someone had reached into his chest and tightened a fist around his heart. For months he had mourned a woman he believed gone, then chased shadows to find the truth. And now here inside the cold metal guts of a hidden facility he heard the unmistakable voice of the one person who had never stopped believing in him. Mason touched Philip's arm lightly and whispered. It came from the right. Philip nodded and crawled forward through the vent, feeling every vibration of movement beneath them. The hum of machinery grew louder, and faint voices drifted upward, not panicked like the guards searching elsewhere, but controlled and routine. Philip reached the next grate and carefully peered through. Below was a room far more sterile and organized than the rest of the facility, a medical holding area equipped with stretchers, monitoring equipment, and rows of lockers. 2 guards stood near a bed, speaking in low tones. On the bed lay a woman, frail, thin, wrapped in hospital blankets. Her gray, streaked hair spilled across the pillow. Tubes were taped to her arm. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose weakly. Philip's lungs stopped working. That was her, Caroline Belmont, alive. He had imagined this moment so many times that part of him wondered if he was dreaming. But then she coughed again, soft, breathless. Fighting, and the sound anchored him to reality. Mason whispered, it's really her. Philip nodded, gripping the metal grate so hard his knuckles turned white. He scanned the room. 1 guard stood near her bed checking vitals, while the other paced near the door, armed with a stun baton. They didn't look alert, but they were still dangerously close. Philip had no weapon, no plan, only determination bordering on ferocity. He motioned for Mason to stay still. With slow, deliberate motions, Philip unscrewed the grate using the multi-tool, catching each screw in his palm to keep them from clattering. When the final screw came loose, he slid the grate aside and lowered himself silently into a crouch on top of a shelving unit stacked with blankets. One wrong move and everything would collapse. Mason watched from the vent, wide-eyed but silent, trusting Philip completely. Philip waited, muscles coiled, choosing the exact moment to drop. The pacing guard turned his back. The nurse-like guard leaned over Caroline, adjusting her IV. Philip jumped. He landed hard on the pacing guard, tackling him to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of both. The guard tried to shout, but Philip clamped a hand over his mouth and slammed his head against the floor until his body went limp. The second guard spun around, startled, reaching for his baton. Before he could strike, Philip lunged at him, grabbing his wrist. The guard swung wildly, but Philip twisted his arm, disarming him, then used the baton against him with a controlled strike to the ribs. The man crumpled, gasping, and Philip finished him with another blow to the shoulder that knocked the weapon from his grip entirely. Mason scrambled out of the vent and dropped onto the blanket shelf, then hopped down, landing more gracefully than Philip had moments earlier. Are they out? He asked. For now, Philip said, chest heaving. He rushed to Caroline's side. Close up, she looked even more fragile than he had feared. Her lips were pale, her skin cool, her voice barely a whisper each time air left her lungs. Mom, he breathed, brushing her hair from her forehead. Caroline's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. It took a moment for them to focus. When they did, recognition spread across her face like a sunrise after years of darkness. "Philip," she rasped, voice thin but alive. His throat tightened. "I'm here, I'm right here. I found you." Tears filled her eyes. Her hand trembled as she lifted it toward his cheek. "I knew you'd come." The words nearly broke him, but there was no time to fall apart. He squeezed her hand gently. "We were getting you out of here." Mason stepped closer, smiling softly, she knew. Caroline looked at him, confusion giving way to gratitude. "You brought him," he did, Philip said. "He saved us both." Mason flushed slightly but straightened with pride. A sudden alarm blared overhead, red lights flooding the room. The entire facility shifted into emergency mode. "Breach in holding sector, All units respond." Philip swore under his breath. "We were out of time." He scooped his mother into his arms, lifting her as gently as he could. She weighed far less than she should, proof of how long she had been neglected. Mason grabbed the drop baton and moved to the door. "Which way?" Philip asked. Mason pointed left. "Ventilation hallway leads to a maintenance exit." Harris marked it on the map. Philip nodded and followed. The hall outside was long and dim, lit only by flashing red lights. Shouts echoed from deeper inside the facility. Footsteps slapped against the floors as guards mobilized. Philip moved as fast as he could without jostling his mother too roughly. She clung weakly to his shirt, eyes half-lidded but full of trust. Mason kept pace beside him, gripping the baton like a sword far too big for his hands. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with two guards sprinting toward them. Philip sidestepped just in time. Mason swung. The baton caught one guard in the knee, sending him collapsing. Philip turned, shielding his mother, and kicked the second guard directly in the ribs. The guard wheezed, stumbling back. Philip used his shoulder to slam the man into the wall, knocking him out cold. "Good job," Philip told Mason. Mason's breath trembled. "Have you never hit a grown-up before?" "You were doing great," Philip said. "Stay with me." They ran again, following the arrows on the wall until they reached a steel door marked maintenance exit, authorized staff only. Philip kicked it open. Cold mountain air blasted into the hallway. Outside stretched a sloping service road that wound away from the facility toward the tree line. "Almost there," Philip murmured. But as he stepped outside, floodlights snapped on, blinding them. A voice boomed through speakers above his "Stop, you are surrounded." Philip shielded his mother's face from the glare. Mason's hand shook around the baton. Dozens of armed guards emerged from behind concrete barriers. Escape looked impossible. But Philip tightened his grip around his mother, eyes fierce, jaw set. "They were not taking us back inside," he muttered. And although the odds were stacked against them, he had no intention of surrendering, because after all this time, after everything stolen from them, he finally had his mother back in his arms. And he would die before letting anyone rip her away again. The floodlights burned against Philip's eyes as he staggered back a step, holding Caroline tighter while Mason stayed close at his side, gripping the baton he'd stolen. The guards fanned out in a semicircle, forming a thick wall of bodies and weapons blocking the exit. Their expressions were focused, not frantics. They were trained for this. The wind howled across the ridge, ripping through Philip's jacket, and Caroline trembled in his arms, but he didn't loosen his grip. He scanned for openings, escape routes, anything, but the odds grew worse with each second. A harsh voice crackled through the speakers mounted on the facility walls. "Belmont, put the woman down and step away. There is nowhere for you to go." Philip recognized that voice not because he'd heard it before, but because it carried the smugness of someone who believed he controlled the entire board. The guards began advancing in synchronized steps. "Stay behind me," Philip whispered to Mason. "Don't move unless I say so." Mason nodded, though fear flickered behind his determined stare. Philip shifted his mother in his arms, bracing himself for a final stand he wasn't sure he could win. But before the guards closed in, a black SUV screeched to a stop behind them. Its headlights cut across the snow-dusted ground. A door slammed, a man stepped out, tall, expensive coat, hair slicked back, cold eyes surveying the scene with a businessman's detachment. And then he spoke, his voice carrying with calculated control. "Stand down." The guards froze instantly. Philip's stomach knotted. This had to be him, Michael Salinger. Salinger walked forward with the kind of confidence reserved for men who never expected consequences. "Philip Belmont," he said, stopping several feet away. "You've created quite a mess. But it ends now." Philip's grip on Caroline tightened. "You're the one who will answer for this." Salinger smirked. "You're not in a position to make demands." His eyes flicked toward the guards. "Retrieve the patient." The guards stepped forward until Salinger suddenly held up a hand. "Wait. I want him to understand before we finish this." He looked directly at Philip, as if talking to an equal rather than a man he'd hunted. "Your mother should never have woken up. Her illness was supposed to progress naturally. But someone interfered with her medication schedule. Someone who didn't understand how delicate the balance was." Philip's blood boiled. "She didn't die. You abandoned her." No, Salinger corrected coldly. We contained her. Individuals in her condition, those with knowledge they shouldn't possess, require controlled environments. Philip glared at him. What knowledge? Salinger smirked lightly. Ask your fianc. Oh wait, you already did, didn't you? Philip's jaw clenched. The mention of Ariana sent another jolt of fury through him. Salinger shrugged lazily. She was useful. She helped ensure you were cooperative. A grieving man is easier to manage than an inquisitive one. Mason stepped forward, rage overtaking fear. She didn't die because she was sick. He shouted, you did this? Salinger's eyes narrowed. And you must be the messenger boy, quite resourceful for someone your age. Philip stepped in front of Mason. You were not touching him. Salinger sighed as if bored. Enough waste of time, take them. The guards moved again until the sound of gunfire cracked through the air. They all ducked as bullets struck the ground inches ahead of the front line. Another floodlight snapped on from a far ridge. A second armed group emerged from behind the tree line, lean, agile, far more coordinated than the facility guards. Their leader, a woman with a tactical headset and a stern expression, stepped forward. Hold your positions. She ordered her unit. Salinger stiffened. What is this? The woman flashed a badge. Federal Protective Task Unit. We've been tracking your operation for months. The guards looked at one another uneasily. Salinger's composure faltered for the first time. Philip seized the moment. Mason, move now. They sprinted toward the tree line, Philip carrying Caroline as fast as he could while Mason ran beside him. Shots erupted behind them, warning shots from the federal team, but the facility guards mistook them as aggression and returned fire. Chaos erupted instantly. The two groups collided in a storm of bullets and shouted commands. Salinger yelled orders no one listened to anymore. Under the cover of disorder, Philip and Mason slipped past the conflict and into the dense trees. Philip's muscles burned as he held his mother close. Her breathing was weak but steady. Mason guided them along the ridge, avoiding open areas. The woods shielded them from spotlights and gunfire. This way, Mason said breathlessly. There's a slope down to the road. Philip followed him down a narrow path carved by runoff water. His boots skidded on loose soil and rock, but he kept his footing. The sounds of fighting faded behind them, swallowed by the mountain. When they finally reached the lower slope, Philip spotted their SUV partially hidden behind boulders where they had left it earlier. Relief hit him like a tidal wave. He opened the back door and laid Caroline gently across the seat, covering her with blankets they had packed earlier. Mason climbed into the front. Philip slid behind the wheel. Stay awake, he whispered to his mother. We were getting you out. Her lips moved. No sound came, but she didn't let go of his hand. Philip started the engine. Tires spun, then caught grip, and the SUV shot forward onto the rough trail. In the rearview mirror, a plume of smoke rose from the ridge where the facility stood. Flashing lights, blue, red, white, flickered across the tree line. Salinger's empire was collapsing. And Philip cared how many people fell with it. He had his mother back. He had Mason safe. And whoever else had been involved, Ariana included, would soon face the truth. They drove down the mountain as dawn began creeping over the horizon, staining the sky with pale gold. Caroline's breathing steadied. Mason watched her with quiet hope. Philip tightened his grip on the wheel. This wasn't the end. But for the first time since the nightmare began, they were heading toward freedom, not further away from it. He whispered, hold on, Mom. I'm taking you home. The road stretched ahead, uncertain but open, and Philip Belmont was finally done running from the truth. Now he was running toward it. The drive back toward Denver felt surreal, as if the world had tilted and finally shifted back into alignment. The sky brightened into a pale orange horizon, casting warm light over the snow-dusted pines. Philip kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting headlights or black SUVs to appear, but the road remained empty. Mason sat beside him, hands wrapped tightly around the burner phone, glancing back now and then to check on Caroline, who lay across the back seat under blankets, her breathing shallow but steadier than before. Every few minutes Philip would reach back to touch her arm, reassure himself she was still with him, still fighting. Mason watched him and murmured, she's gonna make it. Philip nodded, eyes fixed on the winding mountain road. She's stronger than anyone gave her credit for. They reached the outskirts of Denver just as the sun fully crested the horizon. Traffic resumed around them, ordinary people heading to work, completely unaware of the hidden world Philip and Mason had escaped. Philip didn't stop until he reached a private medical clinic he trusted, one that wasn't connected to any hospital network Ariana or Salinger had influence over. The moment he entered, carrying his mother in his arms, the staff rushed to help without hesitation. A doctor guided them into a secure room where they began immediate evaluation, attaching monitors, checking vitals, and starting of fluids with practiced efficiency. Philip stood close, unwilling to move more than a few feet away. When one of the nurses asked him to wait outside, he shook his head. I'm not leaving her again. The nurse nodded, understanding something deeper than words. Mason hovered by the doorway, clutching his hoodie, watching everything but keeping quiet. When the doctor finally finished stabilizing Caroline, he approached Philip with a measured tone. She's severely dehydrated and extremely weak, but she's fighting. Whatever she endured, it was prolonged, but she's still responsive. She'll need intensive care, but the worst seems to be behind her. Philip exhaled a breath he'd been holding since the rescue. It wasn't victory, but it was hope, real hope, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. After ensuring Caroline was resting, he guided Mason out into the hallway. "You need sleep," he said gently. Mason shook his head. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted," Philip insisted. "You've done more than anyone could be expected of a kid your age." "Let me take care of things from here." Mason hesitated, then finally asked, the question lingering in his eyes. "Are we safe?" Philip placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "For now, I need to make sure they can never hurt us again." He stepped into the waiting area and pulled out the burner phone. The federal agents who raided Facility A-17 had intervened at the perfect moment, but they didn't know the full extent of what had happened. Philip intended to change that. He dialed the number on the agent's badge he'd seen on the ridge. "This is Special Agent Monroe," a firm voice answered. "It's Philip Belmont," he said. "We need to talk now." Within an hour, Agent Monroe arrived at the clinic accompanied by 2 other agents. Monroe's presence radiated authority. Her expression was serious but not hostile. She greeted Philip with a curt nod. "Your tip led us to one of the most disturbing illegal containment operations we've ever encountered. We've detained Salinger and several staff members, but he's refusing to speak." Philip folded his arms. "He'll talk when you show him what I have." He handed them the documents he collected, the falsified medical reports, the routing logs, the video of Ariana and the transport team, and the photo of the routing clipboard from the dock. Monroe examined each piece carefully, her jaw tightening. "This is damning. With this, we can pursue charges beyond illegal confinement. Fraud, conspiracy, medical malpractice, human trafficking. We were looking at decades in federal prison." "Not just for Salinger," Philip said. "Ariana Matthews was involved from the very beginning. She orchestrated the cremation, forged documents, and paid for the transport. I want her arrested." Monroe nodded. "With this evidence, she will be," and she was. By noon, news broadcasts blared across the country announcing the arrest of Ariana Matthews on charges of kidnapping, medical fraud, and conspiracy. Her pristine public image shattered instantly. Reporters swarmed outside her luxury apartment as agents escorted her out in handcuffs. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, fury, and humiliation, a far cry from the calculating poise she once used to control Philip. Meanwhile, Salinger faced charges that would likely keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Facility A-17 was shut down permanently, and its remaining patients were transferred to legitimate hospitals. Several staff members turned on Salinger, offering testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. But none of that mattered to Philip as much as the moment the doctor entered Caroline's room that evening with a soft smile. "She's waking up." Philip and Mason hurried to her bedside. Caroline's eyes fluttered open fully, clearer now, the fog of drugs and trauma slowly lifting. When she saw Philip, she reached out weakly. He clasped her hand, leaning close. "You're safe," he whispered. "I've got you." Her lips trembled into the faintest smile. "You found me," she breathed. "I never stopped looking," he said, voice breaking. Mason stepped beside him. "Hi, Mayam," he said softly. "I'm Mason." Caroline turned her head toward the boy, studying him with gentle curiosity. Philip squeezed Mason's shoulder. "He's the one who brought me to you. He risked everything for you." Caroline's eyes warmed. "Thank you, sweetheart," she murmured. Mason swallowed hard, trying not to cry. Over the next days, her recovery progressed steadily. The clinic staff was discreet, protective, and loyal to Philip. Reporters speculated, politicians debated, and the country buzzed with outrage over the scandal. But inside the clinic, the world felt small and peaceful. Philip spent every hour by Caroline's side. Mason slept on the couch in the room. They shared meals, stories, quiet laughter. They became a family before either of them realized it. When Caroline was strong enough to sit up and talk, she held Philip's hand and whispered, "You saved me." Philip shook his head. "No. You held on long enough for me to find you." She smiled softly. "And who is this little guardian angel you brought with you?" Mason flushed. Philip answered for him. "Mom, I'd like to adopt him, if he wants that." Mason's eyes widened in astonishment. "You mean it?" Philip turned to him. "You brought my family back to me. Let me give you one too." Mason nodded vigorously, tears spilling down his cheeks. Caroline reached out and touched his cheek. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Months later, when Caroline returned to her restored townhouse and sunlight streamed through the windows she once thought she'd never see again, Philip stood beside her with Mason at his side. The world outside buzzed with the aftermath of justice and scandal, but inside the healing had begun. The nightmare was over. The truth had won. And the Belmont family now, with one more heart beating inside it, finally stepped into a life they chose together. The story of Philip, Caroline, and Mason carries powerful lessons about truth, courage, and the invisible battles that shape a person's spirit. At its heart, this story reminds us that the world often encourages us to accept what we are told, to avoid asking difficult questions, and to trust appearances, especially when those appearances are crafted by people we believe love us, protect us, or hold authority. Philip's journey teaches us that even the strongest, smartest individuals can be manipulated when grief blinds their judgment. He trusted official documents, respected institutions, and the soothing words of those closest to him, only to discover that the truth had been buried under layers of deception. The story invites us to reflect on how easily we let others define our reality, and how necessary it is to listen to our instincts, especially when something feels wrong. Truth has a way of whispering at us long before we see it clearly, and the courage to follow that whisper can change everything. Another powerful lesson comes from Mason, the boy who appeared when society could have dismissed him as insignificant. Mason represents the truth that heroism does not depend on wealth, status, or power. It depends on heart. Despite living with so little, despite facing a world that rarely acknowledged his existence, Mason stepped forward with honesty and determination. He fought to be heard in a room full of people who judged him by his clothes, not his character, and he risked his safety to deliver a message of hope. His courage challenges us to reconsider who we overlook in our own lives. Sometimes the people with the least are the ones who carry the greatest truths, and sometimes the help we need comes from those we least expect. Mason also teaches us that family is not always biological. Family is built through loyalty, compassion, and the willingness to stand by someone when it costs you something. Caroline's journey, though filled with suffering, reveals another essential truth: hope survives even in the darkest places. Her resilience inside the landfill, her refusal to let despair erase her memory of her son, and her ability to hold on to humanity in conditions meant to strip it away show us the profound strength of a mother's love. Even when she was abandoned, drugged, and hidden away, she refused to let go of the belief that Philip would find her. Her story teaches that survival is not only physical, it is also spiritual. It reminds us that the mind can be weakened by cruelty, but the heart can hold on long after the world gives up on us. Caroline's courage inspires us to fight for ourselves, even when the world seems determined to silence us. Her endurance speaks to anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or oppressed. The corruption of Ariana and Salinger reflects another crucial lesson: evil rarely announces itself loudly. It hides behind polished smiles, official titles, and seemingly good intentions. These characters remind us that manipulation thrives in places where trust is taken for granted. Ariana used love as a mask, turning Philip's vulnerability into a weapon. Salinger used professionalism to justify cruelty. They show that true danger often comes not from strangers but from those who gain power by earning trust. Their downfall illustrates the inevitable collapse of lies. No matter how carefully constructed, deceit cannot survive exposure. The story urges us to be vigilant about the people we allow into our lives, and to understand that loyalty without honesty is just another form of control. Philip's transformation delivers one of the most meaningful lessons of all: redemption comes through action, not regret. For months he blamed himself for ignoring signs, for trusting the wrong people, for surrendering to grief instead of questioning it. But the moment he chose to stand up, to fight, to protect Mason, and to rescue his mother, he reclaimed his power. His courage was not born from perfection but from love. His relentless determination shows that even when we have been manipulated, broken, or misled, we have the ability to rise, confront our mistakes, and build something better. The story reminds us that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else, truth, love, justice, is worth the risk. Ultimately, the story teaches that family is not defined by blood but by connection, sacrifice, and trust. Philip, Caroline, and Mason become a family not because they shared enough, but because they choose one another. They choose loyalty over convenience, truth over deception, and love over fear. Mason's adoption is more than an act of gratitude. It symbolizes the healing that comes from creating new bonds after old ones have been shattered. It shows that even after surviving trauma, people can still build a life filled with hope, belonging, and purpose. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all is this: no matter how powerful lies become, they can never fully erase the truth. The truth waits, sometimes buried, sometimes wounded, sometimes whispered through the smallest of voices, but it waits. And when someone is brave enough to pursue it, protect it, and fight for it, truth always finds a way to rise. This story is a testament to resilience, to love that refuses to die, to justice that refuses to be buried, and to the extraordinary strength found in ordinary people who decide to do what is right, no matter the cost. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.